Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us if you're here. We're going to jump straight in with this training session because we've only got half an hour. Today's session is going to be focused on content search and extraction. And my name is Miruna. I am the customer support and success specialist here at Sitebulb. And I run these sessions on a monthly basis. So we'll cover a different topic each month. So hopefully you find this useful, and I do encourage you to check out our product training page for more. So we've got the recordings from previous session on there, and all future sessions will also be advertised on there. Okay, so I'm going to jump straight in because we don't have that much time. What we're going to cover in today's sessions, like I said, is content search and extraction within Sitebulb. What I'm going to do is essentially talk you through how to successfully set up both basic and advanced search and extraction rules. And then I'm going to give you some examples and kind of different use cases and what you can do with the content search and extraction features. And then I'm also going to give you a couple of troubleshooting examples. So kind of the most common issues that I see users asked us about in the support inbox and how to resolve those issues. So what I'm going to do now is jump onto Sitebulb. What I have here is essentially Sitebulb Cloud. So it is the cloud version of Sitebulb, which you can access straight through the desktop, through the browser. But the feature works mostly the same for desktop and cloud, with the exception of content extraction. And I'm going to tell you exactly what the differences are there and how you can work with them. So whether you're setting up a brand new project or you're coming in here to edit the settings from an existing project, your content search and content extraction features are going to be within your audit settings in the left-hand side menu. So I'm going to start with search and then move on to extraction. Basically, both of these features help you to enrich the results that Sitebulb provides you, right? So basic things like title tags, H1s, meta descriptions, H2s even are collected by Sitebulb as it crawls the website, and you'll have dedicated columns in your report and your URL lists where you can see that data. If you want extra data points about the content or different elements of your pages, you can use these features to extract those, and then you'll have them in your final audit as extra data columns. So starting with content search, when you move on here, you have the option first to obviously enable this content search report, and then you can go ahead and add your rules. So when you add a new content search rule, you're going to see 3 tabs at the very top of your window. The first is for adding a basic content search rule. So what you're going to do here is simply input the word or text that you want Sitebulb to find, so your search term. And then you can literally just click add rule once you've done that, and you're going to set up the most simple of content search rules. Sitebulb is going to look for that search term across your pages, and it's going to give you results based on how many times it has identified that search terms across every URL and how many times it has identified it on each page. Now, right. So that would be a basic search rule. Now you'll see that on this window, you do have some other options. So I'm going to talk you through what they are and how you can use them. First of all, you've got the ignore case tick box. This is ticked by default, which means that Sitebulb is going to look for this term, no matter how it is capitalized. Sitebulb uses a phrase match. So if I put something in here like search term, it's only ever going to match those 2 words when they're together, and one following the other is not ever going to match kind of like variations, like semantic variations of that term. You can, like I said, choose to ignore or to match the case of your term if that's relevant to you. The next thing you've got in here is element to search. What this does is essentially allow you to select which HTML element Sitebulb should search on your pages. So by default, Sitebulb is going to search all HTML elements, and that's going to work well in most cases. However, sometimes you might want to be a bit more specific, and you might only want to search for those terms in certain areas of your pages. So in this menu, you've got the option to choose the head or the body. So that means I will search the head section of the page HTML or the body section of the page HTML. You've also got the option to search in the body, excluding link elements. So this might be really useful if you're trying to, for example, find mention of a certain keyword across your site where that keyword hasn't been linked internally to anything else. So it might give you, internal linking opportunities. And then you've also got the option to search a specific element. So what this allows you to do is to input a CSS selector, and then Sitebulb will only search for your search term within the elements that match this selector. So I've got an example set up here. I've done this with advanced search, which I'm going to talk you through in just a second, but essentially I've selected the button element, which is the class that all of the elements have on my pages, all of the buttons have on my pages, sorry. And then Sitebulb is going to look for these terms within those buttons. So then what I'm trying to do is find every button on my pages that has a call to action that encourages users to book a call or a demo for our Sitebulb Cloud product. So since we're here, I'm going to kind of talk you through what the advanced tab does. So as you can see here, when you move from the basic to the advanced tab, you're now able to add more than one search term. So you can add words or text phrases, one per line, and Sitebulb is going to look for any of those terms within your pages. So it's going to use an OR rule. So it will look for book or demo or cloud, and it will flag up and kind of bring back those results for any of the pages that contain these terms. You also have the option to set an exclusion, essentially. So tell Sitebulb that you do not want to match any pages where these terms are present. So Sitebulb will look for any of the terms in your first box and that it does not contain the terms in your second box. So this will allow you to kind of create exceptions. So for example, for me, I've got an example here where we've got a JavaScript training course on our website, which I know is quite popular and is mentioned in quite a few places across our documentation and help pages. But I might want to look for mentions of JavaScript or JS, JavaScript SEO, where we haven't linked to that course or we haven't mentioned that course. So that might be feature pages, product pages, where we talk about JavaScript, we talk about things like rendering, but we haven't mentioned this JavaScript course that we offer our users. So what I've done is set up a rule where I'm looking for these terms that are relevant to JavaScript. I'm telling Sitebulb, look for these terms within the body of the page, but not within links, because I want to find opportunities where I haven't already got a link. And I want to exclude any page that mentions training, because if the page already mentions training, or I know that we're already probably referencing that course. The last thing you've got here that I haven't mentioned yet is the search in option, which if you click it, you'll see that gives you essentially the option to search in just the text, so just the page content, or you can also choose to search in both the HTML and text. So basically, you'll be looking for the search term in the page HTML as well as the page text. So you might be looking into things like meta descriptions, for example, like anything that is not contained on the actual content of the page that a user would be able to see, right? So those are some of the options that you've got when it comes to setting up content search, both basic and advanced rules. The last thing I want to point out here is that you've also got the option to add multiple rules. So what this button allows you to do is essentially set up loads of basic rules in bulk. So rather than having to add rule and add them one by one from here, you can add a list of search terms, and they are going to be added as individual search rules to your final audit. So that might seem slightly confusing. Let me just show you how that looks in the results. So I've got a completed crawl here with those rules that we were just looking at. And you'll see that I've only got 3 content search rules set up, but in my results, there are 6. So when it comes to JavaScript mentions, here in the overview, you'll see that I've got every rule in a separate row. And then if I go to my URL list, I've got the results for each of those rules in a column. When it comes to the advanced rule that I set up for JavaScript mentions, all of those search terms belong to the same rule. So I've called my rule JavaScript mentions. What Sitebulb is going to tell me is for each page, how many mentions of any of those terms have been found on the page. Well, I don't know if the term that Sitebulb has found is JavaScript, JS, JavaScript SEO, how many of each have been found. I only know that there's 4 terms on that page that match that rule. On the other hand, the other rule that I set up here is a multiple rule. So I added multiple rules in bulk. So if I click edit and look at this rule, you'll see that I've inserted here a list of terms. So contact us, email us, contact support, email support. So I'm looking for these terms just so I know where they're mentioned across the site, and so I can be sure that I link to our help center where users can go and kind of self-help and find answers without needing to wait for a reply for us, right? So I've added these 4 search terms, but because I've used the add multiple rules option, each of these search terms has been added into my report as a individual basic rule. So when I go back here, you'll see that they are each added as an individual rule, and in my URL list, they are also shown individually. So I know exactly which of those terms shows on each of my pages. So that's kind of the difference between how you're setting up those 2 rules. Obviously, when you're setting up your rule with the bulk option, you can add loads and loads of rules, from dozens to even hundreds of rules. However, it is worth kind of taking into account how this data is then going to show up in your finalized report. So sorry, that's the wrong page. So when it comes to this report and looking at your URL list, Sitebulb will only ever show you 50 data columns at once, which means that if you're dealing with more than 50 search terms, more than 50 rules, you're going to have to deal with removing and adding columns in order to be able to analyze that data within the tool. However, you do have the option to export all your search data into a CSV or into Google Sheets if you've got more than 50 rules. And that will allow you to analyze everything together outside of Sitebulb and kind of see all of your data in one. So there's always that option, but it's just worth knowing that what to expect if you're looking at bulk scraping kind of your website. Okay, so that's content search in brief. Since I've already shown you this, I'm just going to briefly talk you through what to expect from this report. So as you can see, it's a fairly simple report. The main things you need to note here is that both the content search and the content extraction report look very similar. In both of them, you're going to have these columns that kind of define the rule that you're looking at. And then you've going to have two columns that are the same on both reports. You've got total found, which is the total number of instances of your content search, of your search term in this example, that Sitebulb has found, corresponding to each rule. So even if some of them were on the same page, they will be counted. On the other hand, you've got the found on URLs column, which represents the number of unique URLs or pages that Sitebulb has found your search phrase on. So if Sitebulb finds the same, search term 3 times on one page, it'll count as 1 for found on URLs and as 3 for total found in terms of metrics. And then as you move on to the URL list, again, this is a fairly simple presentation, but you've got a list of all of the URLs that Sitebulb has crawled, and you've got all of your search terms in here. You've got all of your rules presented individually in a column, and these columns work like every other data column in Sitebulb. So you can remove them, you can add more of them, you can even add other data columns in here to kind of combine this data with other crawl data and help you analyze it. Finally, one thing that is worth mentioning, you'll see that there's numbers and there's zeros in here. There is a quick way of identifying pages where Sitebulb hasn't done your search. And the reason why Sitebulb might not search on certain pages is because you can tell it not to. So in every instance, so both when setting basic and advanced rules and when setting content extraction, you're always going to have this URL tab when setting up your rule, which you can essentially use to tell Sitebulb where to perform your search rules, or if there's any directories where you don't want it to search. So in this case, I've got this search rule. I'm looking for JavaScript SEO terms. I do not want Sitebulb to perform that search on my hint pages because they're not relevant to the goal of this particular search and what I'm trying to figure out. I won't be linking to the JavaScript course from my hints pages, so I don't want to perform the search there. You're saving yourself resources and times when it comes to the total amount that's going to take to do this crawl if you are avoiding Sitebulb doing this search on pages where it is not relevant, right? So if you want Sitebulb to only crawl certain directories or pages, you can add those paths in there. If you want Sitebulb to not crawl certain directories, you'll add the path with the minus in front, and that will set up these inclusion and exclusion rules. And what you'll find in the final report, so if we look for one of the hints pages, might be easier to see this in the content extraction. So I'll show you in a second, but you'll see that some URLs have not found, and some URLs have 0. So there's an easy way there to distinguish where the search extraction or search rule has not been, performed, or where it just hasn't been found as a term. There's a bit more about that in documentation if that wasn't clear enough. Great. So I'm going to move on to content extraction now. Content extraction looks very similar to what the content search tab looks like. You've got the option here to enable the report, which you're going to need to do if you're wanting to perform content extraction. And then when you go to add a rule, this window is going to look different for you depending on whether you're using desktop or cloud. So like I said, right now I am using cloud. So this is what the window looks like. However, if I open Sitebulb desktop here, which is what you're seeing, and I go to add a rule, you'll see that this is a completely different screen. So what you've got here is a content extraction helper, essentially. This is pulling through a live version of the page, and it allows you to point and click in order to select the CSS selector that you want Sitebulb to extract. So again, here is the cloud version, And what you were seeing before is the desktop version. Now, don't panic. If you are on cloud, as you can see right now, I'm looking at the same project right now on my desktop as I was looking on cloud. That is because we do have a connector that allows you to connect to your cloud server and open those projects through your desktop software. The reason that this helper, the point and click helper, is only available on desktop is because of the system that we use to pull through that live website. We can't do that in the browser, but you still have the option to use it even if you are on cloud. So I'm going to show you this through here because I think it's a much more intuitive way of looking at it. Actually, what I'm going to do is pull through one of our Sitebulb articles, because that's one of the examples that I'm using. So I click go, and it's just pulling through a new page. So like I said, on this window, you've got the option to point and click at your CSS selector. What are your CSS selectors? So when you set up a content extraction rule, first you're going to give it a name so you can identify it. So say I wanted to extract my author name from my articles. I know that I was going to be collecting the title, the H1, the meta description of these articles, but I want to enrich that data with some extra information, like, for example, the author name or the publication date, in order to analyze the freshness of my articles on my page, right? So I can use content extraction to do that. I've named my rule, and now I need to pick the CSS selector that Sitebulb will use to identify which element it should extract. So in this case, I want to extract the author name. So I'm going to click on the author name, and I can see that Sitebulb has identified the CSS selector. I can then tell Sitebulb what is it that I want to extract. So in this case, text, which is default, is going to work just fine because that's exactly what I want to extract. I want to extract this text in here, which is the author's name. But you also have the option to choose inner outer HTML, to choose a specific attribute, or to use a regex pattern to kind of do more advanced content extraction if that's something that is useful to you. So I'm going to leave that with text. You also see that when using the content extraction on desktop, you've got a test tab. So I can immediately identify whether the CSS selector that I've picked actually brings through the data that I need. And you see that if I change this to inner HTML, for example, Sitebulb is now pulling through the inner HTML of this element that I have selected on the page. But that's not what I'm trying to do, so I'm going to go back to text. In the data tab, you've got two options. The first is the operation. So what is it I want Sitebulb to do? If you click on here, you'll see that you have loads of options. So by default, usually first match item will suffice. In this case, I've only got the author name once. I only want to pull through the first items that matches that selector that I have provided. However, you might have some examples where there's different things that you're looking to extract. So for example, I've got a rule here where I'm going to need a different page. So let me find this. So this is one of our hint pages. And all of our hints are categorized by report. So in this case, I'm looking at one of the indexability hints. And within each report, I've got a number of critical hints, high hints, medium, low, and opportunities, right? So like they're qualified by priority. Now, say I want to count how many critical hints I have in each report, right? So I can do that with Sitebulb. I've set up a CSS selector that picks out each one of these elements listed in my menu, in my critical indexability hints menu. And then I've selected from the operation count of matched items, because I don't want to extract the content of these items. I want to count them. I want to know how many critical hints are listed on each of these pages. And then if I go to the test tab, I can see that Sitebulb is telling me there's 9 critical hints listed on this page. And when I go to my content extraction results, I'll see that Sitebulb will tell me that for each of the pages. So I can go to my report. I can look for one of the indexability pages, and you'll see that the critical hints count is 9. Okay, let's go back here. The other thing on this tab that we haven't mentioned yet is the type of data. So again, you can choose what kind of data Sitebulb extracts. In most cases, text is going to work just fine, but you might be doing something like looking for the contact us elements on your page, and you might be wanting to extract the phone numbers listed on each page, or you might want to be extracting numbers. Say like you want to extract the price of each of your product pages. You could select the price element for your product pages, select number, and then you'll make sure that Sitebulb will only return the number and it won't return, say, like the pound symbol or price if that's part of like the same selector. So there's loads to play with here. And then again, you've got your URLs tab, which allows you to define where Sitebulb is going to perform this extraction. So in this case, I only want Sitebulb to perform this content extraction on my hints pages, because that's the only place where it's relevant. That's the only place where it's going to match this selector. So I've defined that here. Okay. Some other examples that I've got here. So I've got my author name, which is a fairly straightforward content extraction. I've also got an example here of, I need that article again. So let me just paste that back in. So this is an example where what I'm trying to do is figure out the length of the little blurb that we have about each author on my pages. So the reason I might want to do that is because I know that I've got, we've kind of redesigned how these pages look. And I know that the blurbs for some of these authors are really long. So it's going to look a bit odd. It's going to take up quite a bit of space on the page. So I've gone ahead and I've set up a rule to extract that content. I've selected my selector. I've used text as the method to extract the data. But what I don't want is for the column in my report to bring through all of this text. That is of no use to me. What I actually want is for Sitebulb to count the characters or the words, whatever works for you, and tell me what the text character count is for each of these author descriptions. So I've chose that operation in my data. So now if I go back to my content extraction and I look for, let's look for that URL that we're just looking at, I can see that the author description length is 446. I can also use something like the advanced filter to choose author description length and say, I want to find every page where that is greater than 250 characters, apply it, and here is a list of all of my pages where the author description is lengthier than I would like it to be. And I've now got a point of action. I can export this sheet and send it to our content writer to kind of amend those descriptions if I want to do that. Okay, I'm aware that we are very short on time, but I do want to take you through a couple of troubleshooting options. So please hang out if you can. If not, you can watch the recording later. But there are two critical things that I want to talk you through when it comes to troubleshooting. Say you have set up your content extraction rule, you've tested it, you know it works, and then you've run your audit, you've waited for the results, and it turns out Sitebulb hasn't brought through any content extraction results, right? Like you're looking at this page and there's 0 here in the results. Now, as long as you know your rule is correct and it works, it is very likely that if Sitebulb hasn't extracted anything, is because it hasn't found anything. So one thing that is really important to know when you're thinking about how to set up your audit is what crawler is it that you're using. So there's two crawlers that you can use in Sitebulb. The first is the HTML crawler, which does not execute JavaScript. It just reads the HTML content of your page. And then we've got the Chrome crawler, which does execute JavaScript. Now, if your page loads, partially or completely content with JavaScript, you're going to need to use the right crawler in order to make sure that Sitebulb is rendering the pages correctly, is seeing all of the content on your pages, and it then can perform things like content extraction and content search correctly. So if you use something like the single page analysis tool, you actually can put in something like an example URL from your page and have a look at whether your pages are using JavaScript. So for example, in this case, I can see that this page is using JavaScript to insert words, links, and images. So I know for sure I'm going to need to use the Chrome crawler to crawl this page. So that is the first thing that you want to make sure, is that Sitebulb is rendering your pages correctly, and therefore it can actually pick up the content on your pages. It's going to have, a influence not just in content search and extraction, but in the accuracy of your crawl as a whole. But that is a good way of figuring out that something's gone wrong. The next thing that I wanted to show you is what to do in two cases. First is if you're using Sitebulb Cloud and you're not able to connect through the desktop application. So like I said, if you're adding a rule through Sitebulb Cloud and you're not connected through a desktop, then you won't be able to use the selector, the pick and choose kind of point and click selector, to find out your selector path. So you're going to have to figure that out yourself. The other place where this is useful is that if I go to content extraction, another rule, let me just show you an example. So the page we had open earlier, you can see here that it's got a cookies banner. So in this case, it's a fairly inoffensive cookies banner because, as you can see, it doesn't actually take up the whole of the page. However, you might find that you might be trying to use the point and click selector, and because of the way the page loads, the cookie banner fills up your page, and you can no longer point and click to elements behind the cookie banner, because when you're trying to click allow, you're actually selecting the cookie banner button, right? So that's the second option, which what I'm going to tell you is going to be useful. So what you're going to do, if this was something that was stopping you from figuring out your selector, is use the dev tools to figure out your selector. So you're going to go to the page that you're trying to extract content from. You're going to open up DevTools by right-clicking and inspect, or using F12. And then you're going to find the element that you want to extract. So in this case, say I wanted to extract the short description that these products have. So I can click on that. So it highlights for me in the code. And then you can go ahead and right-click that element, copy, and copy selector. So now that I've copied that selector, I can go back to Sitebulb, find my rule, and paste my selector. And you can see that Sitebulb has managed to pick up that description. I can even go ahead and clean up the selector a little bit. Yeah, so I don't need that whole long string that I've copied from DevTools. But I have managed to find my selector, and I can use the test tool, the test tab, to verify, say if I wasn't able to see what it has been selected because of the cookie banner, I will still be able to verify that I've selected the right element based on the test tab. And I can go ahead and add my rule from there, right? Like name it, make any other changes, and add it. Similarly, you can come to your rules here, use that same method, paste in your selector, and go ahead and add your rule like that. So that's just a couple of examples where that might be useful. but it's just to show you that, if all else fails, there's many other ways of bringing through that CSS element into Sitebulb, and you can still test it if you're on desktop with the test tab, and find the right element for you to extract. So I'm going to leave it there. We've already gone 5 minutes over our allocated time. If you do have any questions, I would encourage you to contact us through support. So if you click the little help and support button at the top of your app, you can either search the help center. So we've got a dedicated document for both content extraction and content search. And then if all else fails, you can always message us and I'll probably be there to answer your questions. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us and hope to see you for the next one. Thank you.